Hey guys, this is DFD, aka Dark Frozen Depths, back with another Kamihime project video. This one, I got some stuff to say before we even get into it, and it's kind of important because it's still very, very powerful things, but you may or may not get it. But, first off, if you've noticed the event banner, there are two characters that are appearing, and they are quite powerful when we're able to pull them from the gacha. One of them we can pull from the gacha the minute this event starts. They are the SSR versions of the Catastrophe Adoans. They have been upgraded from SR to SSR, starting with the water one. I do believe fire is next in about a month or two, but these Adoans are absurdly strong. Try your best to get them. They will become the new reroll targets. In fact, they're just that good. So for water, you will want to reroll for the Catastrophe Adoan. The other 5, you may or may not just want to wait until the right ones come out. But getting 140% or 100% Adoan is still very good as well. But if you want absolute best reroll Catastrophe Adoans, what they do, they take all the weapon skills on your grid that are for the matching element, and they multiply them by 1.5. This is like the Guardian Adoans, only stronger. On top of that, based on the number of limit breaks, you will get additional assault on top of it. Starting off, they get 20% extra assault. If you max limit break them, that's 100% extra assault. So it's kind of like 100% Adoan, only just not for elemental. But they also massively spike your grid output. So with 2 of them, say you have one as a friend Adoan and one as one of your own, that is 200% assault added on top of double grid effects, more or less. The things that aren't affected are the same as the Guardians, though. Like, Lucid Weapon isn't affected. The weapons from the Ragnarok catastrophes aren't affected. We call them null weapons, but they're really phantom weapons. And then, also, soul weapons are not affected as well. But all other weapons will be affected as long as they match that element. So water is starting it off, and then we'll start getting other ones as well. They're also involved with this event too, so that's something to know. And the second thing I gotta say before this all starts, there is heroic difficulty now. I'm not going to go over the details for heroic difficulty because of the fact that they don't really have the enemy info aside from HP. It's like a whole bunch of different lines of text, so you would have to just read that whenever I get to that point and pause the video to understand the fights, maybe. This is still Google Translate after all, but generally you would want quite a few things. You would want some like debuff removal, some cuts, some healing. If you can get some attack and defense debuffs you can land yourself, because you may not have to use water, but it's recommended that you do. And we'll get to that when we get to that part of the video. But starting off, this is a raid event, and if you remember the last raid event, it's the same rules applied. We're starting off with heroic appearing though, so that's the only difference. But just as before, you do expert to get into Ragnarok. You do Ragnarok to get into you do expert to get into Ragnarok and Ragnarok Plus. You don't have to even touch Ragnarok if you want to be honest. But expert is going to be what you get for the materials for both of those. You shouldn't need any materials for heroic, but you do have to be rank 100 in order to access it. It's also recommended that you have a certain amount of attack power and all that too, but you'd still need a very good grid. But anyways, there's storyline of course, so go through the story, you'll get a few battles, and then after that you'll be able to start doing raids. And the battles themselves are very, very easy. They even say you only need rank 1, but you'll be higher than rank 1 by the time you even think about doing events anyways, because you probably should have gotten epic quest stuff. Now, going into the event fights, you see how easily their HP is. It's like 300,000 and there's 400,000. I won't go through any of these details or whatnot. You'll probably kill them pretty quickly. They are a little bit stronger than epic quests, but Epic Quest is extraordinarily easy. Once you get the weapons from Epic Quest, you don't even have to match elements. You'll deal more than enough damage to take these guys down, so there's that. But when you properly grind Epic Quest, you'll get enough Adolins and weapons in order to hold your own quite well against this stuff as long as you match it. Now, difficulties for the actual raids. You need rank 6 to open up Expert, rank 16 to open up Ragnarok, rank 51 to open up Ragnarok Plus, and rank 100 to attempt Heroic. They also recommend that you do have 75,000 on your total weapon grid power, but you don't necessarily need it. You just need enough to survive. Now, the kicker with all of this is that I think you can only attempt Heroic once a day. I'm not sure. So if you fail, then it may set you back from other attempts. You don't need to do Heroic though. It's only for a medal that just goes on your profile just to show that you won. It doesn't do anything special. Also, you cannot use elixirs in Heroic, and you are on your own. All Heroic fights, you are on your own. They are just extra challenge. Now, going into the event itself, I usually skip all this stuff because it explains the rewards. They'd also do it again down bottom. Going into the fights themselves, Expert, 7.2 million HP you got to deal with. And honestly, the enemy AI is kind of simple. It really isn't that difficult to deal with. Now, it says dedicated to defending yourself permanent. Now, I do believe that's like a defense buff. So it's going to increase the defense that it has, which is a normal 10. You can remove it. So that's something to know. Eventually it will do an attack buff to itself. It also has something called Debind, which I don't necessarily know what it says. It's not mentioned here, and it may be on the list of the buffs and debuffs, so hard to tell. But the main gimmick of this fight is just having buff removal. That's the main gimmick of this fight. Just have buff removal so it doesn't drag out. Or you start getting hit even harder because there is an attack power buff. So, out the gate, it's going to try and put defense on itself, and I do believe attack with the debind right after. And then when its HP hits below half, it's going to put defense on itself again. So, buff removal, very key here. But the second time it puts defense on itself, it only lasts for 4 turns. And it is player-sided, so you have to remove it yourself. Now, as for the bursts, fire damage to one enemy, and then raging is fire damage to everybody. Very simple stuff. 3 orbs before it goes into any of its bursts. The triggers are just there to annoy you, basically, but you do want to get rid of those buffs. They will make the fight longer. Now, Ragnarok is where things get a little bit more complicated. 15 million HP, first off. Still has the same orb count before it does its burst. Speaking of normal bursts, it's now going to deal fire damage to everyone and up its double attack rate for 3 turns. Now, if you do not have a means to remove this, then it can be up for practically the entire fight. So, that's something to know. Reason being is because its Raging Burst also applies this same buff. However, it is random 6 times fire damage, so you can actually take quite a bit of damage. If you're struggling, you might need damage cut, but a healer should be enough. Now, going into the triggers, this is like a wall of text, so bear with me. But it says something about after a normal attack, it will grant itself a special state where it will react to any debuffs by the looks of it, or react to abilities that you get that are used against it. So this, if it's getting hit with a blue flame, a blue ability, it's going to deal with that specifically. And when it hits 65% HP or less, when you start using yellow abilities, it'll start dealing with that as well. So that said, you're going to want to be careful what abilities you use throughout the fight. Yellow abilities count as buffs, including cut, and blue tends to count as debuffs, or even something like, say, chaos magic, I think is orb removal. These you have to pay very, very close attention. And then on top of that too, when its HP is 30% or less, it's going to be in a state of 8 random attacks plus attack and defense up. And then it won't counter the yellow abilities, but it still counters blue. So keep that in mind. It will stop countering yellow abilities after its HP gets low enough. So that is something you really need to pay attention to. If you're using red or green, you should be safe. Some green abilities have buffs, some red abilities have buffs or debuffs, so it's not like you're completely removed from all that. It just counters yellow and blue specifically. So that's something to know. And then it basically does the same stuff in the second fight, only the triggers happen a little bit later. Like it'll be 60% instead of 65% for when it starts countering blue and yellow. And then 20% is where it stops countering yellow. So that's something to know. But it will try to remove enhancements when yellow is activated, and it will try to remove debuffs off itself when blue is activated. So that's something to know. It's also going to deal AoE fire damage for each one. And in the case of the blue counter, it will put attack and defense down, and it can stack. So be very, very careful. Now, when it gets to 30% HP or less, it switches over to doing 8 random hits, and then buffs itself with attack and defense whenever a yellow is activated. Well, it says yellow up here, but it should be blue. Again, this is kind of weird. The way they've worded it with the wiki is kind of just weird, or maybe that's Google Translate. I'm not entirely sure, but the general thing applies. If it sees yellow, it's going to counter yellow by trying to remove your buffs. If it sees blue, it's going to try and basically remove it off itself, and start debuffing you as well. And in the case of Ragnarok, excuse me, in the case of Ragnarok, there's nothing special with this compared to the other one, aside from the fact that it is both double and triple attack when it does its normal burst. Everything else is basically the same, just that a little bit different triggers, and it's 72 million HP at this point, so that's something to know. But you're going to want to do Ragnarok Plus, unfortunately, because of the fact it drops both souls, and it is easily one of the better grinding spots. You can argue that you can clear Ragnarok and Expert a lot faster than Ragnarok Plus, but given how Ragnarok Plus drops stuff, and it can be affected by drop rate as well, you'll get much more stuff per run. So you'll ultimately do a little bit less runs compared to doing the other two difficulties. So Ragnarok Plus is the one to aim for the grind spots. If you need help killing that thing, this is still a raid event, so you can get other people into your fight. So that's something to know. Now, Heroic, like I said, I'm not going to go into full details with this one because they don't really have too much up here in this little box. And that would mean I'd have to sit here and read a whole bunch of stuff right here to try and make heads or tails of what goes on in this fight. But it will have some of the mechanics from the other raids, at least the boss itself, because it will still counter yellow and still counter blue, so keep that in mind. Also, you'll have a second fight to deal with. It says Motley Dew, which I think was from the from the expert. So the first stage has 90 million HP, the second stage has 120 million. Recommended combat power is 75,000. On top of this, no elixirs can be used. And the biggest kicker, if you're not using elemental advantage, 90% of your damage is gone. On top of that, the chances of landing debuffs are greatly reduced. It's not full on immune, but it's so bad to the point where there's a very good chance you will not land any debuffs at all on the second fight, and it's saying it's practically impossible to land them off element on the first fight. So water is going to be easily recommended for Heroic on this event. Now, you can still use other elements if you wish, and if you're strong enough, you probably could even clear this with wind. But best chances of winning, go for water. Now, again, I'm going to have this right here. Feel free to pause the video at any point in order to read any of this, because this is a lot, but Google Translate is a little bit weird, so you may see some like broken sentences. So, I just showed both parts of the fight. And remember that the catastrophe is actually, like, the catastrophe is practically the same fight as Ragnarok and Ragnarok Plus, just with more HP and a lot more damaging. And then they give recommended characters for souls. If you don't have the strongest one, just go one tier under. And then they also recommend different Kamihime as well. Some not even from water element, so that's something to know. Except for some of these names are kind of weird. Like, it's got Water Raphael, and then it's got Fabruus, and then it's got Poseidon. And then for Fire, which somehow says Tuesday, it says Apollo, so something to know. Here's recovery characters as well. And me personally, I think Nike is better than Aphrodite when it comes to water healing. But that's just me though. It's because Nike comes with buffs as well as debuffs and healing. But Aphrodite can remove debuffs off of your party. Nike cannot, so it's a case of who you need more. And then they also recommend Adonis as well. My guess is that they recommend Surtur because of the fact that it can resist the damage you take from fire. If you have a few event Adonis that can do that, I think a few of them are in the Epic Quest, because there's one that does it through a summon, and then there's one that does it all the time. If you have them, you can start resisting fire damage quite well. So there's that too. And you, of course, definitely want to use a Kaiser. You can get Kaisers through Eidolon Orbs. Like, if you really feel like you need protection against a fire damage, get a Kaiser. They are very good for that. It's like 2 turns of... I think it starts off at 30% resistance towards that element, and then after you max limit break it is 50%. I could be wrong about that, but the numbers are still pretty high. They're on par with most cuts in the game. And they do stack with cuts as well, so you can get like, say, 60% cut if you have like a 30%, and then you got a Kaiser that gives 30% resistance to fire. So that's something to suggest. They even suggest weapons, but honestly, use whatever weapon works for you. Because when it comes to soul weapons, you have a lot of flexibility with that, so don't worry too much about that one. However, the weapons that you have for sub-weapons, you definitely want to make sure that you have a lot of offense and defense, as in, like, assault, and then pride or vigor, stuff like that for offense. Definitely exceed for your burst. But in the term of defensive weapon skills, you would want stuff like defender and ascension. You definitely want to make sure you have a decent amount of all of that in order to try and survive. And then they say, they give another how to fight right here. Now, keep in mind that turn lag is a thing, and these can be long fights. So, the more turns you take, the slower the fight's going to get. So be very, very careful with that one. Now then, when it comes to the rewards, I will say this out the gate. What you want to do, 300 to both souls. 300 blue, 300 red. I won't go through the list anymore because of the fact that you will have to complete both soul lists in order to get the SSR ticket fragments. They're in every event. They are in every raid and advent event now. So you're going to want to get those because it takes 10 of them to get a guaranteed SSR pool. And with 2 per event, that's 5 events. And we typically have 1 or 2 events in between all of that, so you could take anywhere between 1 to 2 months before you finally get it. So be careful not to miss out on those. And then of course they got stuff in the event gacha. It says magic jewels are here, but I haven't seen them. So I'm not entirely sure you can get magic jewels, but getting raid tickets are very hard to do. So that's something to know. Now, as for what we can get for rewards, again, heroic is only for the medal. If you don't care about a challenge or if you're looking for just the meaningful stuff from an event, heroic can be avoided. And technically, you can even avoid Ragnarok Plus if you're willing to grind out the first 2 long enough. So that's something to know. But the Adolan actually isn't too bad. It's got decent base stats, and then its main thing is elemental attack plus stinger. Now, me personally, I would want more elemental attack, but the 30% elemental attack and the fact that it gives stinger means that you can get a little bit of 2 multipliers off of this, on top of whatever assault that your grid has, or vigor, stuff like that. So it could give you, surprisingly, if you were willing to play with random number generator, or RNG as people call it, if you're willing to deal with that, this can shell out a surprising amount of damage. But if you already got, like, say, 40% or 45%, then don't worry about it. Of course, if you have gacha Adolans, then they're definitely going to be stronger than her. However, I would keep her in subs, because of the fact that when you summon her, she gives a defense up buff as well as a barrier. We'll go into what that is in a second, but that's always helpful to have Adolans that give defensive base buffs, because you will need quite a bit of them later down the line with some of the harder fights. Now, you'll definitely want some of the stronger ones, like the ones from the Gacha or the Kaisers or so. But these are always helpful. And the fact that it gives 2 buffs in one is very good. Like 2 buffs in one use. Now, the weapon. The weapon is actually pretty good. I would give it at least some use until you find final break weapons. That's because this is large assault and small defender with a very good amount of base attack power. And interestingly enough, you stick it on your soul, when they burst, they'll buff their own attack and defense. I think it may be B-frame because it's both of them at once. So that's something to know. But this actually isn't too bad for the starter weapon at least. Now the other weapons I wouldn't really care too much about because we get so many double skill weapons. Like we'll get access to so many double skill weapons, and then on top of that, we are roughly 1 month, a little bit over 1 month away to being able to just grind out final break limit weapons. So don't worry too much about the single skill ones. They're just fodder. Especially considering that one of them is a double attack increase, and Rush is not that good of a skill. Now, as for the event missions, it's the same stuff as last time, because that's going to be the new format. You got a solo expert, you got a solo Ragnarok, you got a solo Ragnarok Plus, and you'll get extra raid tickets. Ragnarok Plus, solo with anything that works. Expert, you have to solo with R Kamihime or less. Ragnarok, you have to solo with light element. So that's something to know if you're trying to get extra raid tickets, which you may or may not want because the rate of raid tickets have dropped dramatically. But they have increased the chances of getting the SSR stuff. I've managed to pull quite a bit of them the last time, just from clearing the event list. So that's something to know. Of course, if you jump into somebody else's raid like 5 times, or you start your own 3 times, you'll get extra stuff daily. So it could help you out. I don't worry about it too much, especially considering the fact that the gacha can throw, like the event gacha can throw even more. So that's something to know. But again, reminder, heroic difficulty has quite a lot to consider. If you're going to try it, you definitely need buff removal. You definitely need to have some cut and some healing. Preferably you want to do this with water, but if you're strong enough, you might be able to do it with different elements. It's not that much HP compared to what we'll see later down the line. But you are taking Guardian Raid level HP out, so that's something to know. For comparison, they total 210 million HP, and that is more than any of the Ragnarok catastrophes. It is also more than Aratron. And it's about the same amount of HP as Hagif, if I remember correctly, so that's something to know. But it's split between 2 fights. So be very, very careful. Now, this last one, you definitely need to, this last part, you definitely need to pay attention to this one, because this may or may not help you out. The defense buff and a barrier. Now, the defense buff, it doesn't have a numerical amount, but the barrier, it's 750. Now, keep in mind, barrier acts like just block damage, like damage you'll block off. This can be stacked with, say, defense buffs and cuts, and you can start reducing the damage by insane amounts. If you have seen my video on Atlas, that's one of the main reasons why I like using Awakened Arrows, because of the fact that she ends up giving defense buff plus barrier, and that can give a little bit extra protection on top of, like, say, damage cut. So that's why I say pay attention to this, and it lasts for 2 turns too. So if somebody doesn't even get hit, they can keep their barrier for the next turn. So literally 2 out of every 10 turns you can have an Adon just sending out barrier and defense buff. But anyways, the Stinger, I think it might be like 30%. It generally tends to be that way when it's large, but I can't confirm that. That's just my estimate on it. But the main reason you would probably want this add-on is for your sub slots because of the buffs. So that's something to know. Now, last thing I gotta say before I end this video too. There's going to be a lot of stuff on the JP side that I really need to look into for sneak peeks. There's new weapon skills, there's going to be new raids, there's ultimate limit breaks, which means there's going to be some weapons going into 5 stars, and I've seen a sneak peek of that. They're disgustingly powerful. Expect a sneak peek video pretty soon. I'm just waiting to get some info on what the raids are going to be like, because that's going to be an even new difficulty called Malicious, which is higher than the Heroic. So that's something to know. So there will be some sneak peek videos pretty soon, at least one, and that's going to try and cover some of that stuff because it's got some really interesting stuff, and it may actually help you out later down the line. It depends on how long the game lasts, or if you play the Japanese side, so on and so forth. Because these videos can be used if you play Japanese side. Keep that in mind. But not all of them can be used because they're probably covering old stuff the Japanese side won't even never see again. But it does cover a lot of basic stuff when I go through, like, say, weapon skills, accessories, gacha idolin, stuff like that. So that's stuff that will easily be usable regardless of which version you play. But anyways, that's all for this. More of this will come soon. And like I said, sneak peek video whenever I find some more stuff out about it. I'm very curious because skill level 40 and level 200 weapons. I don't think I need to say too much more than that. But that's all for now, guys. More will come soon, and take care.